All right, good morning. Today we're going to be talking about some aspects of social psychology. Fascinating discipline in and of itself. We're taking an entire course in social psychology. So, in order to social thinking and social influence, we need to remind ourselves that we do not exist independent of others. Instead, what happens all day long, let's start with social thinking here. Instead, what happens all day long is, believe it or not, I know you're going to be like, I'm not judgmental, and that's baloney. All day long, we are passing judgments on other people. We're seeing how people behave, and we're making an attribution for why did they behave that way, okay? And the two main attributions that we can make are what we call situational or dispositional attributions. A situational attribution is an explanation where you say, the reason that that person behaved in that way is because of something about their situation. The dispositional attribution is to say, hey, the reason they behave that way is because it's something about them as a person. It reveals who they are. And so, lo and behold, we find that the fundamental attribution error is this problem that we tend to use dispositional attributions for other people's behaviors. So when a student comes in late, the fundamental attribution error is to look at that student and go, wow, they are really lazy, okay? Instead of saying, you know what, maybe there was an accident on the highway today, maybe, there was no parking spot, maybe there's something about, no, it's the tendency to attribute to the person. And so what we find is that this fundamental attribution error tends to decrease the better you know somebody, the more you know their situation. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it flips when it comes to, attributing your own behavior. Why did I get an F on the exam? Because it was an unfair exam. See, so we attribute our own behaviors in the exact opposite way, much more to situational than dispositional things, especially our failures, by the way, our negatives. Okay. So, when we form impressions of others, what do we use to form those impressions? Well, I'll tell you what, expectations are huge. Okay, we're going to talk about expectations, including the confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecies. And then we'll talk about cognitive distortions such as stereotypes and categories and things of this nature. Well, starting with confirmation bias, what happens is that if we have a preset expectation, and we'll come to the stereotypes after we do this, but clearly if you have a stereotype, a preset belief system, then what's going to happen is you're going to search for those observations which confirm what you already believe. Okay, so the confirmation bias is the problem that we tend to search out information that supports what we already believe is true, rather than information that might contradict our current belief system. So self-fulfilling prophecies, on the other hand, are this idea that, do I have it on this slide? Yeah, I have it on this slide. Let me do this. So Rosenthal and Jacobson, what they did was they went to grade school teachers and they told them, oh, this summer we did some academic testing on your students, and these 20%, the testing clearly shows they're ready to bloom this year. Okay, and then in the next year they did. They actually improved quite significantly compared to the other 80%. But this 20% had been chosen randomly, okay? And this is what self-fulfilling prophecies are about. So stepping back to the previous slide, look at this. A teacher's expectation. Rena's older brother was brilliant. I'll bet you she is brilliant too. And so what does the teacher do? They smile more, they spend more time, maybe give a little extra attention, and of course the student then responds enthusiastically, thus confirming what the teacher expected in the first place. Okay, and so this simple behavioral confirmation then manifests itself right here in this self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, this is actually pretty fascinating idea. When my kids were little, in particular, although once in a while she still tries it, my wife always insisted that I contact my student teachers using my work email so that it would show doctor in the title and name of the university I'm professor. The idea being, if the teacher saw that, oh, this child's father is a professor, they would then have these higher expectations and expectancies, and hence fulfill. Did it work? I don't know. It feels like couldn't hurt. All right, couldn't hurt. Well, it turns out even in the world of science, we fall for these self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, science is supposed to be the unbiased, walk in with no opinions and just seek the truth of the world, right? But unfortunately, we don't. See, here's a fascinating study, two fascinating studies, where self-fulfilling prophecies, or perhaps I guess it could be a combination of confirmation bias in here, led us astray. So in one study, what they did was they took students in an undergraduate, I think it was a learning class or something, and they assigned them rats. And so throughout the semester, you're going to be teaching your rats how to run mazes. We'll use this as a study of, the principles of operant conditioning. But anyway, what happened was, they told half of the students, yeah, you've been given the smart rats. They've been genetically bred, specially created to be smart. And the second group was told, ooh, you've been given the maze dull rats, or the stupid rats, the ones that have been bred to not be all that smart. And by the way, yes, this can be done. This is absolutely possible. That's a whole nother discussion for another day. It's a scary, scary but true thing. You can genetically breed smartness. And so what happens is that at the end of the semester, those students that had the dumb rats truly had lower performance, had worse scores and everything else. But as you can probably guess, these were the exact same rats, and they were just randomly assigned, right? So what happened? Those students that got the smart rats, you know what? They probably gave them a name, didn't they? They probably pet them and played with them. But the stupid rats, I doubt that they were given a name. Come on, I've already been told he's stupid. Why would I even? And so can you imagine, like, class time is over, and if you got a stupid rat and the class time is over, you're like, I am out of here. But if you got a smart rat and class time is over, what do I know? You're going to pet your rat. You ain't even bring treats for your rat, spend a little bit of extra time with your rat. Yeah, and you create the expectation that you had, but you confirmed it. And in another study, what they did was they took an aquarium, they just placed it on a table, and they videotaped the aquarium, and there was a single fish in there, and there was a black line across the center of the aquarium, so that you have a top half and a bottom half. And so now in this video, a woman walks in, she just sprinkles something into the water and walks off camera, and then they just let it run for 30 minutes. Okay. Now they bring participants in and they tell them, look, we're doing a chemistry experiment, but you know what, we need help in recording our data, okay, because we just have too much data. So what's going to happen is that you're going to watch a video, and we need you to record how much time the fish swims at the top or the bottom of the tank. Now a woman's going to come in and sprinkle some chemicals that are designed to make the fish swim on the top of the tank, okay? So all you got to do now is record if they swim on the top or the bottom. And so now, have at it. But as you can imagine, half of the participants are told the exact same story, except the woman comes in, sprinkles chemicals, and it's designed to make the fish swim on the bottom of the aquarium. Okay? Same scenario, same story, but one group expects the fish to swim on the top, one expects it to swim on the bottom. It's the exact same videotape, they're recording the exact same fish swimming, and they have an incredibly significantly different results based exactly on what you would expect. And I was like, wait a minute, what? They're just simply watching behavior. How could they possibly? Because they have an expectation and they will find it. They will make it true. And so in this case, maybe anytime the fish is swimming at the midline, right on the line, if you think it's on the top, middle equals top. If you think it's supposed to be bottom, middle equals bottom. What do I know how it happened? But it did, and it's inevitable. So in relation to this notion of social attributions of sorts is prejudice. Okay, so what we find is this three-chain system here. A stereotype is a belief about the characteristics of a member of a particular group. Okay, a stereotype is a belief that all members of a particular group will carry the same sets of characteristics. prejudice is an attitude, a negative attitude towards members of a group, whereas discrimination is the actual behaviors. Okay, so clearly stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are related to each other, but one is a belief, one is an attitude, one is a behavior. Okay, so keeping those three in mind. Oh my goodness. Okay, my phone is recording this whole lecture somehow. All right. So what are stereotypes? And stereotypes are a little bit weird, but here, let's say, for example, what happens is any group, let's take a safe stereotype. Professors are absent-minded, right? Have you ever heard of the absent-minded professor? I don't know, Flubber, right? Robin Williams remade Flubber many years ago. But anyway, absent-minded professor. So along the bottom, instead of this phenotype, imagine it says absent-mindedness, something like that, right? And so group A is not professors, group B is professors, something like that. And so what you find is that group of not professors, group A, there's a lot of variability in absent-mindedness. Some are more, some are less, you know, but the average is the dashed line on the left. Go to the group B, the professors, and you can see that the average absent-mindedness by the far right dashed line is clearly higher than. But what you find is, again, there's lots of variability. So what you find is there's the overlap between group A and group B, professors and non-professors, is amazingly large. And yet, despite that, what we find is that the stereotype itself is in fact true. All right, professors are absent-minded. You can see the difference right here. And so that is sort of the nature of many stereotypes. That somewhere down in somewhere way deep down, you're going to have this, you know, group average difference, this difference between the group averages, but yet there's going to be so much variability within each group and so much overlap. Clearly, as you can see, you know, group A, the non-professors, there are in fact some people in group A that have more absent-mindedness than the professors group. Okay, absolutely. And in fact, many situations with stereotypes, these two dashed lines or these group averages are far closer. But as long as there's a difference between the two, then there's a basis for a stereotype. Well, prejudice and discrimination have been changing in recent years, and changing back in recent years. Let me just, I'm trying not to be political, but the Trump effect, we'll just pretend the world is nice again. So what happens is, you know, discrimination used to be very blatant, okay? In fact, in one, it was a test in the early 1950s, and I forget the name of it, but it was basically attitudes towards desegregation. That was basically the idea behind the test, was to establish people's attitudes toward desegregation. And one of the questions on that test was, boy, I'm going to try to get this right. There should be a separate section on streetcars for Negroes, I believe was what it was. And I mean, the idea is in the early 1950s, maybe you'd say yes, maybe you'd say no, but the fact is in the early 1950s, you wouldn't be shocked by such a question. Now, if somebody asked you this question nowadays, you'd be like, what the hell are you even asking me? And I mean, that is really sort of a big insight into the change in prejudice and discrimination. Because it's no longer blatantly out there. It's no longer on the surface in the way that it used to be, okay? Because just hearing that question would shock you. Even a non-prejudiced person in the 1950s would not be shocked by that question. It would be just a perfectly normal, rational question to be asked, okay? So clearly, the nature of prejudice and discrimination has changed radically. However, it's not gone by any means. So here in the top, what they did was they had a little video game set up, and I don't know if you've ever seen these, but when I was a kid, these were awesome. These were even before video games, okay? And they were an arcade game, and they would have these pop-up targets, and you were supposed to shoot with a gun. And it was like an old west scene, okay? It was pretty cool, you know, a tavern, a saloon, kind of a, you know. And what happens is if, you know, the bad guy pops up, you shoot him, you get points. But what happens is, you know, they go up, they go down. They're really fast, right? Boom, boom. So you got to react. Well, sometimes what happens is, you know, little old lady pops up. You shoot the little old lady. Uh-oh, that's not a good thing. And so you got to make a really rapid decision. Should I shoot or should I not shoot? Okay. Now imagine taking this same idea and bringing it forward. And if the person that comes up in the image has a gun, shoot. But if they're holding something else, don't shoot. And so, as you can guess here, they're going to have people coming up with either guns, wrenches, bananas, I don't even remember what else, but they're going to be holding various objects, guns or other objects. And the faces are going to either, the people rather, are going to either be black or white. And guess what happens? I think you can imagine the outcome, okay? And so clearly there's a willingness to shoot if the target, for a lack of a better word, comes up as a black person, regardless of what is in the hand, okay? Or here, if you take a look at these rows, these two rows of faces, images. Here, I'm going to have to move my own face out of that one. You can see in both rows what's happening is on the far left side, clearly those are anger faces. On the top and the bottom, that's angry. On the far right, clearly that's a happy face, okay? Clearly. Now what's happening is that these faces are morphing from angry to happy in gradual steps. And in fact, the gradual nature of these changes is exactly the same for the two different rows. And so they ask people, tell me when the face stops being angry and starts being happy. And as you can probably imagine, what happens is that people say the white faces turn happy earlier than people say, therefore holding up some kind of a prejudice of an angry black man or something. So clearly in other ways we find that this prejudice is sort of, now as an interesting notion when it comes to prejudice, okay, as we said, there's these two main types of racial prejudice, but we can talk about other prejudice, and we will briefly. So we can talk about blatant prejudice and subtle or automatic prejudice. And it turns out that the more people are educated, the less blatant prejudice they exhibit. All right? So education clearly is related to blatant prejudice, but education is not related to subtle or automatic prejudice. So clearly there's a difference there. In fact, some very, very cool research has been done on implicit prejudice in the take a look on YouTube for, it's called the implicit association test, and it's a fascinating line of work. I've seen recently I've seen the implicit association test used for other things other than racial prejudice, but the work that I've seen on YouTube, I think it was Alan Alda did a fascinating presentation on it. It's worth checking out. Moving on. How about gender prejudice? So 1968 there was a research study, and what they did was they had an article, and it was like, read this article and tell me how good it is. And the article was either John T. McKay or Joan T. McKay. All right. So same article. The only difference is the author, whether it's a male or a female. And so the articles were rated as lower quality if the woman was the author. But in 1980, when they replicated this study, they found no differences. However, gender discrimination is not gone, because take a look. Parents announce the birth of their baby boys with pride and girls with happiness. So that's still true. And if you go to other parts of the world, wow, is gender discrimination alive and well. All you have to do is look up the impact of China's one-child policy on the rate of baby boys being born, and it's pretty straightforward. Any parents, because in China, this policy was recently removed, but for many generations, Chinese couples were allowed to have one baby. And it turned out pretty much that, in Chinese and all Asian cultures, boys are far, far, far preferred to girls. And what happened was that those Chinese couples that were in fact able to afford it, now it was against the law, but those that could afford it would go and, when the woman was pregnant, they would go and get a sonogram, right, or a ultrasound, I guess you'd call it, and they'd find out the gender of the baby, right? And if they found out it was a girl, then you'd have selective abortions. And so all of a sudden you'd find that those Chinese people that could not afford this kind of a thing had babies coming at about a 50-50 ratio. But those families that could afford this kind of a thing had baby boys at a ratio of like 70-30. I mean, it was out of control, kind of gender discrimination you had going on there. So where does prejudice come from? And this is very, very powerful. Authoritarianism is a personality trait or a need to dominate or something of this nature. And it's actually I was at a research conference recently, and this concept of authoritarianism was very well studied for some reason. It was just flavor of the day, and it was powerful because they linked it very, very strongly to Republican voters. Okay, Republican voters are far more likely to have the authoritarian personality traits and personality styles, and people with authoritarian personality styles are far more likely to be much more prejudiced. So I'm just saying that was a research of the day. I'm not making it up. Don't even. So interesting. What other kinds of things? Cognitive distortions or expectations. Yeah, we already said self-fulfilling prophecies and stuff. But competition, and I'm going to talk competition in the next slides. So, and stereotype threat. I don't know. Do I have stereotype threat in there? I don't think so. Stereotype threat is, well, that's kind of different. Nah, we don't need that. But anyway, this next one, competition. So it turns out that any time that there's scarce resources, that prejudice arises. It just does. There's in-group and out-group prejudice. Well, in this very classic study here, this was Muzaffar Sharif, one of the earliest social psychologists. And so there was these boys, and they were going to a summer camp. And as they were getting on the camp bus, they picked them up in town, and they were going to take them out to the camp. And he just assigned them to groups. You're a grizzly, you're a rattler, something like that. I don't even remember what the names of the groups were, but you're a grizzly, you're a rattler. And then he put them into cabins, and the grizzlies in one cabin and the rattlers in one cabin. And then he created different kinds of competition, like baseball games, etc. And what happened is when you have this competition going on, these grizzlies and these rattlers hated each other. Oh my God, there was food fights. They were raiding each other's cabins. They were just constantly bad-mouthing the. In fact, look at there's one boy in this image. He's sneaking into the other group's cabin to steal things from them. And so what happened was that this huge prejudice arose. There was this huge us versus them mentality that arose in this game of competition. But then what happened was Sharif came back and he said, okay, I'm going to set some cooperation with this group. So he forced them to work together. Okay? He put together a couple of situations that could only be solved if the grizzlies and the rattlers worked together. So at one point, the camp water supply, the water doesn't work. Shoot. So we need to bring water over from, this source over to here. So basically, the boys had to put together a bucket brigade, move water in a line, and they had to work together to get the bucket from the well to the cabins. Or another one, the camp bus broke down. We have to push the bus back to camp, okay? And we can only do it if all of you boys, grizzlies and rattlers, work together. And so after finding this chance for a common outcome, a common good, this forced cooperation among them, the prejudice just disappeared. And so Muzaffar Sharif found this, you create competition, you create prejudice. You create cooperation, you reduce prejudice. It was quite a powerful study. So moving on to social influence now a little bit. We can talk about persuasion. Persuasion is, the communication of information that's intended to change somebody else's attitudes. Although I must say I'm a little biased. I don't necessarily think the point of persuasion is to change attitudes so much as it is to change behaviors. Because if you are a marketing person, and I will do that later, what's more important? You change the public's perception? I now believe that your product is good. Or behavior. I will now buy your product. Yeah, I'm sorry. It is the buying the product that matters, not the attitude toward the product. The attitude towards the product is simply a stopping point on the way toward buying it more. So, and we find very interesting what is persuasion, what is propaganda. You can see I found this that on the left and the right, one in Arabic, one in English. And what these were pamphlets that were dropped by the U.S. military in Iraq, and it was intended to teach the people in Iraq, the American perspective, for lack of a better word. I can't even remember what it says. Your oil industry will be destroyed, or something like that. I can't even remember. It was something you could probably read it. And so the idea is this persuasion or is this propaganda? And it really depends on who you ask now, isn't it? If you ask the Iraqi government, it's clearly propaganda. If you ask the U.S. military, it's merely education, right? Yeah, it's interesting. All right, in order for a persuasive message to be comprehended, and or more specifically behavioral change, okay, because on the very far right of this image here you can see action, no action, which is basically behavioral change, no behavioral change, right? But in order for behavioral change to occur, all of these steps must be passed. Okay, number one, the persuasive message, somebody must listen to it. Okay, they must pay attention. And so, lo and behold, we could talk about things that make persuasion easier, and we could look, or make persuasion more effective, shall we say, more effective persuasion. We could look at each and every step here and think about it. Okay. And I can't even remember, I'm going to have some of this on the next slides, but this brings it all together in one shot. Do people pay attention? And so guess what? If you're an advertiser or something and you put out a pretty girl with people will pay attention now, won't they? Okay? So why do people use bikini clad girls in some of these advertising? Because people pay attention. That is the very first step. Do they comprehend the message? Okay, and yes or no. And this is actually a powerful consideration. Some people, I'm going to leave it alone. So you need to know your audience, okay? And so if you make a message that is too complex for the audience that you are speaking to, then it will not be comprehended. Now, I'm not trying to say that Donald Trump speaking is at a third grade vocabulary level, but it's true. Why? Because his I'm not political. I'm just saying it's true. Okay. So, does the audience believe it? Okay, yes or no? So you need to be convincing. And so what happens is sometimes in commercials, what they'll do is they'll put a guy for it's a commercial for medicine, and so they'll have a guy coming out in a white lab coat, even though they have in tiny little letters, "This is a paid actor," but he's wearing the white lab coat. You're like, that's convincing. Okay, I believe this guy. Do you remember it? And so sometimes advertisers will use jingles, or they'll make little messages. Heck, one of my favorites when I lived out in New York, and I still remember it, and it was 1-800-MATTRES. Leave off the last S for savings, right? It was 1-800-mattress, but they were like, their little jingo was, 1-800-MATTRES, leave the last S off for savings. I still remember that. It was a catchy little tune that I heard on the radio. So that's useful. And so will people behave, and will action occur? So quite a powerful thought that the act of persuasion requires all of these steps, and you can, in fact. So here, this is a slightly different way to lay it out. What are the elements of the persuasion process? The source, that is the person passing the message. And again, are they wearing a white lab coat? Are they, Michael Jordan and you already love them, or something like that? Receiver factors, such as personality factors, in particular need for cognition. So, some people, do I have it up here? The 2 routes of persuasion? No, I don't have it. Okay, there's basically 2 routes of persuasion, all right? And that is what they call the central route and the peripheral route. The central route of persuasion is the idea that some people who are what we might call high in need for cognition, some people, they need to have much more rational thinking. And so people that are high in need for cognition can really only be persuaded using what they call the central route. The central route is persuasive message which is based in logic, okay? But some people that are low in need for cognition, here's another personality trait that's connected to authoritarianism, low in need for cognition. And that is to say people that are lazy, that would rather just mindlessly absorb things. And so people that are low in need for cognition, persuasive messages are much more effective if you use the peripheral route, which is more like using jingles, using flashy spokespeople. And so we find that some people are persuaded more by the flashy spokespeople and the jingles, and some are much more persuaded by logic. Tell me why your product is better than the other product. Not just a jingo or something flashy or something. Tell me the reasons, okay? So we find that the message can be, you can use fear versus logic, and again, people that are high in need for cognition, logic works better. People low in need for cognition, fear works better. Okay, it clearly works that way. And the channel of communication, it can make a huge difference. Different messages or different persuasive messages are more effective in different mediums, in person, on the internet, the radio, television. Nowadays, unfortunately, Facebook has become an incredibly convincing channel to a lot of people. I saw it on Facebook, so it must be true. So here is, in the game of persuasion, here's a classic study in social psychology. This is Solomon Asch's study. What he did in his study here was he brought participants into an experiment, and he gave them this task right here. I'm going to show you the standard line on the left, and then there's going to be 3 comparison lines on the right, and your job is to tell me which of these 3 lines is in fact the same as the standard line. It's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, people do this, and of course, he's going to have different standards, different comparisons over and over and over, and people do this on their own, and like 99.9% correct, okay? Once in a great while they get it wrong, but people are very good at this task. So then what he does is he brings people into an experiment, and there's 7 people there, okay? What you're seeing here is 3 of them, okay? So it turns out on the left side here, there's going to be, what is that, 4 more people, okay? Now, it turns out that 6 of the people in the study actually work for the experimenter, and only this one guy here in the center in the white shirt is an actual participant. Okay, and so what happens is they're going to do this task with the lines, and they're going to work together. And so they start it up. They put up the standard. The first person says, "Oh, the correct answer is C. The correct answer is C. The correct is C. The correct is C." And so the guy in white, he says C. Okay, happy. Then they do this for a while, and then all of a sudden, around the 4th or the 5th trial, they'll do another one like this. A different set of standards and whatnot. But up it comes. And they're going, okay, what's the correct answer? And the guy, the first person goes, B. And the second person goes B. And the third goes B. And the fourth goes B. And the fifth goes B. And all of a sudden, it's time for the kid in the white shirt. He's the real participant. And it's like, what you going to do there, boy? What does he do? He's like, B. It's like, well, we already know that the guy in the white shirt knows the correct answer, okay? But lo and behold, when faced with this kind of conflicting information, I know it's C, but 5 people before me said it's B, okay? And so lo and behold, this is what happens. The behavior has changed even though this guy does not really believe that what he is saying, the words out of his mouth, he knows they're not true, and yet he says them anyway, okay? What's pretty powerful is that there was a variety of different studies done, and they found, say, for example, that people, the ability to persuade in this way, let's say, for example, they set this up, and person 1 goes, the correct answer is B, right? Again, if you recall, right, the correct answer is B. Oops, right, not. Okay. Second person, B. The third person says C, okay? The 4th says B, the 5th says B. Now comes the real participant, and the real participant goes C. No problem. Okay? As long as they had one other person back there that kind of backed them up on it, they're willing to go away from the majority. Okay? It's just, if you have a consistent majority, then you will almost always have what we call conformity. We call it conformity because nobody told the guy to do it. Nobody told him to change his behavior. This guy changed his behavior all on his own. He did so because of social pressures, whether they were real social pressures or imagined social pressures. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. Okay. However, moving forward, we can talk about behavioral change that is based on compliance. Compliance is a little bit different. People change their behaviors. Now, their private beliefs probably have not changed. They changed their public behavior in the face of obvious social pressure. Okay? So what happened was the obedience. Okay, obedience is compliance that occurs following direct command. There you go. Person in authority. And so what happened was there was Stanley Milgram. Stanley Milgram is a social psychologist, and he was studying, he was in the late 50s, early 60s, and he was a student of history, and he was looking at the Nazi Germany in World War II, and he was just like, what is wrong with the, and this was the prevailing belief system at the time. What is wrong with the German people? I mean, are they just evil sons of bitches? Because, I mean, the German soldiers, last week this dude was a baker and today he's shooting people in the head. What the hell is going on? Okay? And so Milgram believed, no, German people are not by definition evil people. Instead, they are perfectly normal people that are simply put into an incredibly bad situation. So he does a very classic study in psychology, in social psychology. So what happens is he brings two people into his laboratory, and one's going to be a teacher and one's going to be a learner. However, he rigs the game, okay? Because one of these people that comes in actually works for him, and one is a real participant, okay? So, but we don't know who's who. And so what happens is they flip a coin, and our real participant is always the teacher, and the person that works for Stanley Milgram is always the learner. Okay, so here's the story, says Milgram. I'm studying the effects of electric shock on learning ability. Okay? So here's what's going to happen. They're going to take the learner and they're going to hook him up to an electrical shock chair, put him in a room, a separate room, close the door, and the teacher's brought out, and they're shown basically a shock machine. Okay? And there's little levers that go from 15 volts, 30 volts, in 15-volt increments, 15 all the way up to 450 volts. Along the bottom, these little switches, which are labeled in volts, are also labeled in, like, the first three switches are labeled like minor shock. And then, the next three might be small shock, something like this. And then at some point they're lumped up moderate shock, and then later it's like severe shock. And by the time you get to the end, it just says danger XXX, right? It doesn't even give it a name anymore. It's just XXX. Okay. So now here's the story. Now we're going to, you're going to teach this learner some what they call paired associates. So first you're going to teach them, let's say for example, television window. Okay, so there's a pair of words. So now later on, every time you say television, the learner needs to say window, because that's the word associated with it. And so they go through a list of, 100 different pairs, something like this. And then after that, they start to ask, okay, the word is television. What is the correct answer? Is it A, window, B, couch, C, pillow, something like this. And so now what happens is that, the learner, so at first the learner gets the first three correct or something, and then all of a sudden what happens is the learner gets them incorrect, gets one wrong. Ooh, give them a shock, boom, 15 volts. Now, every time the learner gets another one wrong, increase the shock from 15 to 30 to 45, etc., all the way. And so now, at various points in the process, what's going to happen is the learner, remember the learner's not actually getting shock here, right? They're in another room. But what happens is at preset times, you take a look here, maybe you can see it better than me, but at 75 volts, the learner yells, ugh, and you move your way down somewhere, I can't even read this. 110 volts, he yells, ow, my heart, all kinds of crazy stuff. And then somewhere around 350 or something down here, they stop responding. Okay. So what's going to happen is almost inevitably at some point the teacher is going to say to Stanley Milgram, hey, there's something not right here. I don't think this is correct. And so Stanley Milgram will then say, this is science. You must continue. Something like that. And so Stanley Milgram has 4 scripts, 4 little things to keep them on track, including, I think the most severe one is, you must, or the experimenter demand, or the experiment demands that you continue, something. And so if people protest after that 4th prompt by Stanley Milgram, stop. That's the top electrical shock they're willing to administer. All right, so that's very cool. So the question is, how much electrical shock will these participants give before, they stop? And lo and behold, the average person went all the way to 450 volts, even though the learner stopped responding. And often the participants, or the teachers rather, would be like, I think he's not okay. Science demands that you can. Okay. And so, for all they know, they're shocking a dead body or at least unconscious. They have no idea. All it took was Stanley Milgram in a white lab coat saying, "This is science, you must continue." Take it back to Nazi Germany. The dude that was a baker last week and was brought into the military was given a gun, and he is being told, if you don't shoot that person in the head, you will die. Okay, I can understand why these average German citizens turned into horrible people, because look at what the average participant in this study did with nothing but a white lab coat in science. Okay, so it's kind of a scary thought, this obedience and what it can create. So it turns out this is actually pretty interesting. How does a cult indoctrinate? But we can talk, simpler things. But what happens is what happens is it's the extreme form of persuasion, right? So what happens is cults start out by asking people to volunteer. How would you like to participate in a free informational dinner session? Ooh, free dinner? Informational? Okay. They do a variety of things. Let's just say what they're going to do is simple techniques that they take to the extreme, like the foot in the door phenomenon, for example. The foot in the door phenomenon is a situation where if you want to persuade somebody and convince them to do something large for you, what you do is first get them to do something small. Foot in the door phenomenon actually has its roots in back in the day when there was these traveling salesmen, right? They would go around selling vacuum cleaners or whatever. And so they would go to the door and they would say, "Excuse me, ma'am," because of course this is a time when it was always mom staying at home, right? "Excuse me, ma'am, can I have a minute of your time?" And according to these salesmen, as soon as they said, "Why, yes," then that's what was called foot in the door. Once you have a foot in the door, you almost always make a sale. So by getting somebody to give you a moment of their time, they will then give you larger things. And so this is how cults take advantage of it. They're going to take this simple principle, foot in the door, and they're going to get people to accept very small favors first and then move to the bigger things. Some other things that might be used. Consistency. The foot in the door, as we said, was a powerful one. But another one is a lowball technique. And this is a principle that is often used by car dealerships. This is a big one. But even on Black Friday, they might do this. You see these awesome circulars, ooh, and then you get there and they're like, ooh, we only had 10 of those. So now that you're in the store, how about looking at this other product? Okay, so you get somebody to commit to something attractive and then really reveal what it is. Okay. Reciprocity. Yeah, this is the idea that if you want somebody to comply, then first you do a little favor for them. The door in the face technique is actually an interesting technique where what you do is, let's say, for example, you need $50 for gas and an oil change for your car, and you need to go to your folks. So you go to your folks and say, "Mom and Dad, I need $500. And they're like, "What? No!" You say, "Okay, fine. Can I have 50? Okay? And you can get your 50 because compared to the 500, it's like nothing. So if you need a relatively smaller thing, ask for a much, much larger one first, get rejected, then your real request will seem much more normal. The scarcity principle, yeah, telling people they can't have something. I like that. Well, I'm going to go on. Okay, so as we said, these elements of persuasion are really, really useful in marketing. Marketing is one of the most interesting applications of psychology, the basic principles of psychology. So you take a look here on the left. You see this bottle? This is what a Heineken bottle used to look like. You see that on the right? That's a new bottle. It's more manly. But this is interesting because in Europe, this bottle on the left is perfectly acceptable because the European conception of what is manly is different than the American conception of what is manly. And so this is a common problem for many international businesses when they try to expand into a new market. they try to simply take their existing product and just drop it in the new market. And clearly, this bottle on the left just did not have the right shape for an American market. The bottle on the right did have a shape which is acceptable to an American market. Here's a very, very good study. I love this one. Zones of Seduction. Oh, yeah. And so let's check out how, psychology is being used to not just persuade people, but to change their behavior. Okay? So there's a lot of words here, but I trust you can read because you are a university student. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. So this guy, he goes out to a test supermarket, a supermarket where they're testing different principles to see how they might modify purchasing behaviors. Okay, and so check this out. What happens is a woman, she's about to enter our speed bump area. So what happens is that they have changed the floors. Okay, so instead of just a flat, smooth floor, instead they have a parquet floor. Now, parquet flooring has two impacts. Number one, it's a quality flooring. It costs more money, and therefore the products in that area of the store will be of higher quality, or will feel like they are higher quality, even though they're the exact same products. And these parquet floor has the effect of making the sharpened cart go do 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 do. And so by definition, people slow down to avoid that rattling. Okay? So you've done two things. You've slowed people down to make them spend more time in that area, and what you've done then is to increase the perceived quality of the products in that area. Now, similar idea is used in restaurants, say for example, and shopping malls. And it turns out that restaurants tend to use faster paced music in the background because restaurants make more money if they get you in and get you out. They want you to leave the restaurant as fast as possible. Okay? So fast music tends to increase the speed that people eat and finish their meal. But in shopping centers, they want you to spend more time. So they put much slower, relaxing music to calm you and slow you down. Okay, moving forward. So now, here, the shopper's speed, yes, she slowed down. Okay, now, look at this. They got to one, it was cans of Campbell's soup, $1.95, maximum 3 cans per customer. And all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, we just talked about the scarcity principle, didn't we? And all of a sudden, this woman, she grabs 3 cans. Why does she grab 3? Because it's maximum. Oh, shoot, these are scarce. There's not enough to go around, otherwise there wouldn't be a limit. So I'm going to take as many as I can get. And so it's an effective thing. Then moving it forward, now it gets really small. Now check it out. They have this 1.95, right, as a price. Or they put $1.95 with a dollar sign in front. And once they put a dollar sign in front, they just sold fewer products. Because the dollar sign in front of the 1.95 reminds people about the money that they lose rather than the soup that they're going to gain. So you need to shift it around because it turns out that people view the loss of something far more heavily than the gain of the same product. And so if you focus people's behavior or their attention to what is it that you will gain in this transaction, you will sell far more products than if the consumer is focused on what they will lose in the process. So anyway, marketing is one of my favorite applications of psychology. And if I were to ever go into the world of business, this would probably be the angle I would enter into. But I'm not going to enter into. So anyway, that's the end of topic 7. I'll see you next time in our discussions of topic 8.